Chapter 10 is about types of research that you can do that are not, quote, true experiments. Naturalistic observation is one type. Basically, this means not being involved, not affecting your subjects, and just observing and recording data. In a lot of cases, you do that because you can't do a true experiment. Sometimes in experiments, there would be ethics of trying to assign people to groups, like in the traditional, smoking causes cancer thing. You can't assign people to smoke or not smoke at random. And there are practical constraints, like if you're comparing people who are ill and people who aren't or something, you just can't do it. You just can't assign. And we mentioned the Hawthorne effect before. Basically, sometimes what you're trying to study can't really be studied if they know you're watching. So things like behavior of people kissing in public, you can't really have an experiment and say, go out there and kiss and expect this to be like, an answer to your question of how much or what type of kissing goes on in public in the real world. And the study I often mentioned for being kind of silly, the urinal behavior study, where people decided to test whether when guys go to a public restroom, if someone walks up to the urinal and then someone walks up right beside them, does it make the person take a longer time to start urinating than it would if there was no one there? So obviously also you can't assign groups and do an experiment that way. And also shopping for clothes. So similarly with animals in the wild, you can watch them from far away, but sometimes you have to get close. That's one of the points of one of the videos. There's quite a few videos on Moodle for this chapter, is that to really see what was happening in some of the situations, they needed to let the animals become familiar with them so they could get up closer and would still act relatively naturally. And there have been many experiments with rats in which they study foraging behavior by having big sandboxes in a room or having maces that have 8 arms which represent 8 different spots to go forage. And then you have to decide how close that is to how rats might behave as they were going along the bayou or underneath your house. And so sometimes maybe watching is the only really practical way to do it. Oh yeah, I guess this chimp tool use one of them in Moodle, is one that shows having to get close. And another thing of wanting to study chimp language, both their ability to use our language and their ability to communicate on their own, is complex. And so they have sounds already that communicate their emotions, sounds and body language and things. And so they communicate, they warn of predators, and they resolve conflicts using systems they already have. And Sue Savage Rumbaugh, another video, points out a situation in which they taught them to use symbols, and this ape started spontaneously writing the symbol rather than punching the symbol on a computer keyboard. And the book had an example about parental-child behavior and behavior in restaurants. And so if you think you're being watched by psychologists, you're probably going to be on your best behavior. Your best being not actually your average behavior. And what people really want to know is probably your average behavior. And a really difficult thing to study in the lab is violent behavior. And so this little graph over on the side isn't directly related to studying in the lab, but it points out, let's see, up the y-axis is intentional firearm deaths per 100,000, so more up this way. And then along here, number of households with firearms. So of course, in terms of deaths, USA were number one, although Switzerland does have a few more guns per household than we do. And so if you're trying to study violent behavior in the lab, which is the Bobo study, how do you create violent behavior in the lab? So in that case, they tried modeling and modeling violent behavior. In the book example about the bar, they looked at the behavior of bar patrons, but they were in Canada, which in America are known for their politeness and lack of violence. And so even with this kind of naturalistic observation of sitting in the bar and measuring behavior, it still may be questionable to what degree it generalizes to Americans and other countries. But generalization, remember external validity, is really a reason for getting out of the lab. The closer you get to the real behavior, the more generalizable it is. Also, the less controlled it is, so in some ways harder to study. So a question that the Bobo doll study sort of addressed was, does watching violence on TV and movies promote violence in real life? There are people who think that it does and that violent video games do. There's a Japanese game, Raplay, and this link is also in Moodle. So basically it's a news story about this game, and it's banned in some areas, and it's kind of offends the sensibility of people to think that you play a game and the object of the game is to rape people. But in terms of science, it's really difficult to say that this contributes to bad behavior in real life. And so if we ban behaviors of rape in games, should we ban behaviors of killing? Or should we make it we can kill monsters but not humans? Or maybe bad humans like Nazis, and humanoid monsters but not good humans like Americans? Another question related to violence is, does being punished physically as a child result in more instances of violence on the playground? So one of the things that they did find in a study, I think this is another Canadian study, was that by asking people how much they were punished as children and then looking at things like arrests and treatment for minor mental problems, they found a correlation between being punished as a child and having these problems. Now, correlation or associated with is not necessarily results in or causes. So it may not be that the say the punishment caused them to have more mental problems. It could be that some type of mental problem, say depression, runs in the family, and depressed people maybe get more frustrated or less able to handle problems and resort to violence, both as parents and as children. Which isn't one of my theories, I was just making something up there. And by the nature of the study, you can't randomize people to be punished or not punished as children. And naturalistic observation is the best, if not the only way to study this. And the Bobo doll experiment, also a video on Moodle, it wasn't naturalistic observation, it was an attempt to study violent behavior in children in the lab. And so if you see the study, one of the things that they talk about is girl flinging this object in the air. And so It might be by some counted as like a violent, aggressive act. Might be by others just that's what kids do, and it's fun to throw things in the air. And so the Bobo doll was one that it's kind of a punching bag design. You hit it, and then it's got a weight in the bottom and a round bottom, and it just like stands back up. So affordances mean things about the object that suggest its use. So pretty much they put a thing in there that suggested you should hit it. And they also put guns in there, which were probably even more popular toys back then. I think it was the 60s than they are now. And so the thing that you would do with guns is shoot stuff, kind of engage in violent behavior. And so having a doll that elicited violent behavior and guns was something that made it not surprising that certain things appeared like kids were engaging in violent behavior. And they modeled behavior by having an adult come in and engage in some of these. The degree to which the model's behavior was generalized, was picked up and done by the child, and the degree to which that would generalize in terms of the child seeing, cop shows on TV and wanting to go out and engage in violent behavior, I think is quite questionable. And so, does modeling create violent behavior? And another question, another theory is viewing violent behavior results in desensitization. So some people think if you watch lots of violent behavior, lots of violent shows, it'll desensitize you to the damage of violence and make you more likely to or less inhibited in terms of engaging in violent behavior. So now we have two ideas that one of them says you watch TV and it'll make you engage in violent behavior because of modeling. The other says it'll make you desensitized to violent behavior. So they kind of seem contradictory, but they both kind of predict increases in violent behavior from watching TV. And then there's another theory that violent behavior drains off, watching violent behavior drains off these violent tendencies, which is basically kind of a Freudian theory, the catharsis theory, and that the id can be satisfied by fantasy. And you can't really read the Calvin thing, but he's engaged in a bunch of violent snowman behaviors. And in terms of studies of various types, there are always types of methodological issues. So one thing that I did last year in this class was to have door holding behaviors measured by naturalistic observation. So you went out on campus and watched doors. Now, we did it such that ended up doing it on Friday at noon. The class got out at noon or 1. And I guess they got out at noon. And anyway, there weren't that many people left on campus. So that was kind of a problem. But on the other hand, other days you might have had so many people that you'd have trouble just keeping track. So methodological issue there could go both ways. You have respect for privacy when you're observing people, especially since it's if you're not interacting with them, you're not getting consent. And so you have to wonder about, for things like the Do Guys Pee Faster Alone study, how did you stay out of the view of the person? How did you hide? How did you record data? And how did you protect their privacy?